She spent her last $100 on an old hangar to start from scratch. But when their military sheepdog suddenly barked at the door, the woman realized that this was not just a building. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The morning began like most of them did for Lena, with the sound of her daughter coughing through thin motel walls and the dull hum of a broken air conditioner that only pretended to cool the room. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners. The floor smelled faintly of bleach, and outside, rain tapped against the window with the persistence of someone who refused to be ignored. She lay still for a few seconds, listening to her daughter's shallow breathing and the heavy sigh that came from the black German shepherd curled up by the door. Shadow always slept there, as if guarding them from a world that had already taken too much. Lena sat up slowly, pressing a hand against her lower back. Her body carried the stiffness of too many years under cars and too many nights sleeping on sagging mattresses. She glanced at the clock. 6:12 a.m., another day to survive. She reached for her work pants, still smelling faintly of oil, and glanced toward the small kitchenette. 2 slices of bread, 1 half-empty jar of peanut butter, and a carton of milk that was more air than liquid. She made a mental note to skip breakfast again. On the nightstand, beneath a stack of overdue bills, stood a single photograph in a chipped wooden frame. Evan's smile still looked as confident as the day he had left for deployment. The flag the government had sent after his supposed death was folded neatly in a box under the bed, together with the letter of condolence written in that sterile language that could make tragedy sound like procedure. Killed in the line of duty during a classified operation. No place, no witnesses, no body. Shadow had never accepted it either. The dog would lift his head whenever a plane roared overhead, his ears pricking as though waiting for a familiar signal. Even now, 3 years later, he sometimes whimpered in his sleep, paws twitching, as if still running toward a command that would never come. By the time Mia stirred, the rain had softened into a drizzle. The girl sat up, rubbing her eyes, hair sticking out in wild curls. "Mom, are we late again?" "Not today," Lena said, forcing a smile. "I don't start till 9. Mia grinned, pleased at the rare luxury of time. Shadow stretched, yawned, and rested his chin on the bed, looking between them as though he belonged to both. The day at the garage was slow. The owner, a heavy-set man named Roy, spent most of his time shouting into his phone while Lena did the actual work. She replaced brake pads, checked oil levels, and listened to the same country song play twice an hour on the radio. Around noon, she counted the cash in her pocket, $36, enough for milk, gas, and maybe 1 inhaler if the pharmacy gave her the discount again. On her way back from the shop, she stopped at a bulletin board outside the grocery store. Between flyers for lost cats and used furniture was a faded sheet of paper, soaked from the rain and flapping in the wind. She pulled it off the board and read, "Municipal auction abandoned hangar 447 at Millfield Airfield. Minimum bid, $100. Sold as is. No warranties." She frowned. An abandoned hangar wasn't exactly a house, but it sounded like 4 walls and a roof. Her motel lease expired in 2 weeks, and the landlord had already warned her there would be no more extensions. She read the line again. Minimum bid, $100. It felt like the universe was taunting her. She had exactly that much left, tucked in an envelope under the mattress. The thought of spending it terrified her, but something deeper, quieter, whispered that maybe she was supposed to. The name Millfield Airfield stirred something in her chest. That was where Evan had trained before his last assignment, before everything went dark. That night, she could hardly sleep. She lay on her side watching the faint glow of the motel sign through the curtains. The rain had stopped, and every few minutes a car passed by, headlights sliding across the walls like ghosts. Shadow breathed steadily at the door, and Mia slept with her hand resting on his back. Lena turned the words over in her head. Abandoned hangar. Millfield Airfield. $100. It could be worthless, a rusted shell, or it could be something else. The next morning she told Mia, "We're going to a little auction today." "Are we buying a house?" the girl asked, eyes bright with hope. "Something like that," Lena said, though she didn't believe it herself. The municipal office was almost empty. A few old men with coffee cups sat scattered around the room, talking about crop yields and weather. The clerk behind the desk looked bored until Lena stepped up with her envelope of cash. When she told him what she wanted to bid on, his eyebrows shot up. "You sure about that, ma'am?" he said. "That hangar's been locked up since before I started here. Roof's probably ready to collapse." "I'm sure," she said, even though her voice trembled slightly. He shrugged and called out, "Lot 47, starting bid, $100. No one else spoke. The room was silent except for the squeak of the ceiling fan. Lena raised her hand. "Sold," the clerk said after a pause, shaking his head with amusement. "Guess it's your lucky day." Or the stupidest, she thought. He handed her a folder of keys, some brittle papers, and pointed toward a dirt road behind the airport. "You'll find it at the far end, past the tower. Watch your step. Ground's uneven." By the time she and Mia reached the airfield, the sun had come out. The asphalt was cracked and lined with weeds. In the distance, the hangar loomed, massive, silent, streaked with rust like dried blood. The numbers 47 were still faintly visible on the side, faded but defiant. "Is that it?" Mia asked, her voice small. "That's it," Lena said. Her stomach fluttered with a mix of dread and curiosity. Shadow sniffed the air and barked once, sharp and alert. The doors were heavy steel, chained shut with a padlock thick with corrosion. She tried the first key, nothing. The second, third, fourth, all useless. By the 20th, her fingers ached, and Mia was drawing patterns in the dirt with a stick. Finally, the 23rd key turned. The lock gave a dull metallic sigh and fell open. Lena pushed at the doors, but they wouldn't budge. She leaned her shoulder into them, bracing her boots against the ground. Shadow growled softly, the sound echoing through the empty airfield. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Move!" An inch, then another. The hinges screamed, and rust flaked down like orange dust. Mia ran up beside her, putting both hands against the cold steel. Together, inch by inch, they forced the doors wide enough to squeeze through. The smell inside hit first metal, dust, and the faint sweetness of old oil. Light spilled through holes in the roof, cutting golden paths through the shadows. The space was enormous, cavernous, echoing every sound. For a long moment they just stood there, letting their eyes adjust. Then Lena noticed the shapes. Rows of them, huge and motionless, draped in thick gray tarps. Her heart stuttered. The covers were custom fit, not random junk. Someone had taken care of them. She stepped forward, each footstep crunching on old debris. Shadow followed close behind, tail stiff, ears forward. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air. Then he moved toward the far wall, sniffing again, pawing at a wooden crate. "Mama," Mia whispered, gripping her sleeve. "What is all this?" Lena didn't answer. She crouched beside the crate, brushed off the dust, and saw a photograph lying on top. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Evan, standing in front of this same hangar, smiling, with a man in uniform beside him. On the back, in Evan's handwriting, "If I don't come back, trust the dog." He knows. Her knees gave way, and she sat down hard on the cold concrete. "Mama?" "It's nothing, sweetheart," she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. She turned the photo over again. The words looked fresh, the ink unfaded. That meant it hadn't been sitting there for decades. Someone had been here not long ago. Shadow pawed at the crate again, whining softly. Lena lifted the lid. Inside was a metal case, military style, with a single USB drive taped to the top and a small folded note. 3 words written in the same hand. "Don't open here." She looked around the silent hangar, at the rows of covered shapes, at the sunlight filtering through holes in the roof, at the dog who refused to take his eyes off her. The world seemed to narrow to a single heartbeat. Mia tugged her sleeve. "Mom, is Daddy here?" Lena swallowed hard. "Maybe," she said softly. Maybe he was. They stepped back out into the open air. The sun was setting, painting the tarmac in gold. She looked once more at the photo in her hand, then at the hangar that had swallowed years of silence. Behind her, Shadow turned his head toward the sky as a distant jet passed overhead. He gave a single, mournful bark, as if answering some call only he could hear. Lena felt a chill crawl up her spine. She didn't know what she had bought that day, but it wasn't just an empty building. As she locked the door and started walking back toward the road, she thought about the last words Evan had ever said to her before he left. "If something happens to me, promise you'll keep fixing things." She glanced at her daughter, then at the dog trotting faithfully beside them. Maybe that's exactly what she was doing now, trying to fix what was broken, even if she didn't yet know how. The wind carried the smell of rain and metal. Behind her, the hangar stood silent, waiting, its doors shut once again. But inside, beneath layers of dust and secrecy, something had already awakened. And Lena, for the first time in years, felt that strange electric pull of possibility, the same one she used to feel when Evan looked at her and said, "You hear that? That's the sound of something about to take off." The drive back to the motel that evening was long and silent. The headlights of passing cars washed over Lena's tired face, turning the lines around her eyes into shadows. She clutched the small metal case in her lap as if it were fragile glass, afraid to set it down, afraid to open it, afraid not to. Mia had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head resting against Shadow's side, the dog motionless except for the slow, steady rise and fall of his breathing. Lena's thoughts circled endlessly, returning to the same image, the photograph in the hangar, Evan smiling in front of that place she had just opened, the words written on the back in his hand. "Trust the dog. He knows." She stopped twice on the way, once for gas and once because she needed air. The night smelled of damp asphalt and cold wind. She could not shake the feeling that someone might be following her, though each time she looked in the rearview mirror, the road was empty. When she reached the motel, she checked the parking lot twice before unlocking the door. Inside, everything looked the same: the flickering lamp, the leaky faucet, the hum of the old refrigerator, but nothing felt the same. Something inside her had shifted. After tucking Mia into bed, Lena sat at the small table by the window. She turned the metal case over in her hands, studying the dents, the dull gleam of its hinges. Shadow lay nearby, eyes open, watching her with quiet intelligence. "You'd tell me if I shouldn't, wouldn't you?" she whispered, running her fingers over his head. The dog only blinked. Taking a deep breath, she opened the case. Inside was a single USB drive, a few folded pages of handwritten notes, and a maintenance logbook stamped with the Air Force insignia. She ignored the papers for now, focusing on the drive. Her hands trembled as she inserted it into her old laptop. The screen flickered once before the video began to play. Evan appeared, sitting in a dimly lit room, his uniform unbuttoned at the collar, a deep bruise shadowing his jaw. His voice was steady but tired. "If you're seeing this, Lena, it means things went wrong." The hangar number 47 isn't what they told you it was. Those planes, they're not part of any museum project. They were evidence. I was supposed to catalog them, report discrepancies in inventory. But what I found was something else: equipment sold off the record, technology disappearing into private hands. I tried to raise questions. They told me to shut up or disappear. So I chose the second. He paused, rubbing his forehead. You need to find William. He's the only one who knows everything. Don't go to the authorities. Don't tell anyone you found this. For your sake and for Mia's. I'll come for you when it's safe. Then the screen went black. Lena sat frozen, staring at her reflection on the dark monitor. For several minutes, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every word reverberated in her mind. He was alive. He had been hiding. He had chosen to let her believe he was dead to protect them. A mix of grief and fury swelled inside her, the betrayal sharp and electric. But underneath it all was relief, raw and trembling. He hadn't abandoned them. He hadn't just vanished. He had been fighting for something bigger than himself. She replayed the video twice more, studying the background bare concrete walls, a single metal door, a map pinned behind him. Nothing to tell her where he was, nothing that could anchor him in space or time. She picked up the folded papers next. Evan's handwriting covered them in tight, hurried lines, serial numbers, dates, fragments of thoughts. Corruption runs deep. Don't trust Major L or anyone from procurement. Another line further down. If they find this place, burn it. The truth's worth nothing if we're dead. Lena rubbed her temples. Every instinct told her to pack up and run, but where would she go? She thought of Mia, asleep in the next room, of the dog who still waited for his master, and of that vast, silent hangar filled with sleeping machines. There was something inside that wanted to see the story through, no matter the risk. The next morning, she drove back to the airfield. The air was crisp, the light pale and washed out. The hangar loomed ahead, massive and indifferent, its doors streaked with rust. When she stepped out of the car, Shadow jumped down beside her and sniffed the ground, tail low, cautious. The moment she reached for the chain, a voice behind her said, "You must be Lena." She spun around. A tall, thin man stood by a rusted pickup truck, one hand resting on a cane. His gray hair fluttered in the wind, and his jacket bore a faded patch of the Air Force. "Name's William," he said gently. "I figured I'd find you here." Her pulse quickened. "You knew my husband." "I did," he replied, eyes softening. "Good man. Stubborn as they come." She hesitated, searching his face for deceit, but found none. He looked like someone who had seen too much to bother lying. She gestured toward the hangar. "He left me a message, said you could help." "I was hoping he would," William said. He walked slowly, the cane tapping rhythmically against the ground. "I worked with him during the investigation. He uncovered things he wasn't supposed to see. When they tried to silence him, he came to me. We moved what we could here. Planes, records, anything that proved what they'd been doing. Then he vanished before they could make him vanish their way." Lena unlocked the hangar. The doors groaned open, releasing a breath of stale air. William followed her inside, eyes scanning the rows of covered aircraft with something like reverence. "Still here," he murmured. He'd be glad. Shadow sniffed along the concrete, tail twitching. He stopped near the far wall and whined. William hobbled over, knelt with effort, and brushed his hand against the paneling. "He hid something here," he said quietly. "Always said the dog would find it." Together, they pried open a loose metal sheet. Behind it was a narrow alcove filled with boxes and tools, the air thick with the scent of oil and dust. William reached in and pulled out an old flight jacket, its fabric stiff and cracked. "His," he said simply. The dog nosed at the jacket, then lay down beside it with a low sigh, as if settling into a memory. Lena's throat tightened. So, he's really alive? William looked at her for a long time before answering. Last I heard, yes. But he's still in hiding. There are people who'd rather this story never sees daylight. They spent hours going through the storage space. Lena found blueprints, flight manuals, even maintenance records from decades past. Some of the papers bore government seals. Others had been scrubbed of identification. Everything spoke of a man meticulous to the end. By afternoon, the sunlight streaming through the cracks had turned gold. When they stepped outside, Lena felt the weight of the place pressing on her shoulders. "Why now?" she asked. "Why let me find this?" "Because he trusted you," William said. "He said you'd know when the time was right." That night, after putting Mia to bed, Lena sat again at the table with her laptop. She reviewed the footage one more time, this time not as a wife, but as someone trying to piece together a mystery. The more she watched, the more she noticed the tired slump of his shoulders, the subtle glance to the side as if checking something off-screen, the faint sound of machinery humming in the background. He wasn't somewhere far away. The acoustics suggested a confined metal space, another hangar perhaps, maybe not even far from Millfield. Her phone rang suddenly, cutting through the quiet, an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello." A man's voice, calm and cold. "Sometimes the past is better, left buried." She froze. "Who is this?" The line clicked dead. Her heart pounded. She looked out the window, but saw only darkness and the reflection of her own pale face. Shadow lifted his head, ears pricked, a low growl rumbling in his throat. She reached down and stroked him, forcing her breathing to slow. Whoever they were, they knew she had found something. The next day she told William about the call. He frowned. "They've been watching this place for years. You opened a door they wanted to keep shut. You'll have to be careful." "I can't just walk away," she said. "I know," he replied. Neither could he. In the following days, she spent every spare moment at the hangar, sorting through documents, cleaning dust off metal surfaces, trying to understand the scale of what her husband had been part of. Shadow accompanied her everywhere, restless, alert. Once, while she was sweeping near the back of the hangar, he stopped suddenly and barked at the wall. She followed his gaze, and for an instant she thought she saw movement, a flicker of light near the window. But when she went to look, there was nothing. By the fourth night, she was too tired to think straight. She was about to close up when she heard it. A whistle, low and clear, cutting through the silence. One short, two long. The sound made her blood run cold. It was a signal Evan used to call Shadow when they were training. The dog lifted his head instantly, tail beating against the floor, whining with recognition. "Shadow," she whispered. "Stay!" But he didn't. He bolted toward the doors, barking. Lena chased after him, the sound of her footsteps echoing. She pulled the doors open and looked out. The airfield was empty, the sky cloudless. Only the faintest scent of exhaust lingered in the wind. Then she saw them. Tire tracks, fresh, leading away into the dirt road. She sank to her knees beside them, her heart hammering. He had been here. He had come to the hangar, maybe even seen her. The thought was almost too much to bear. When she told William the next morning, he didn't look surprised. "He's testing the water," he said, "making sure it's safe. You'll see him soon." Lena wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in something again. She spent the rest of the day polishing the metal surfaces of the planes, feeling the cool texture of steel beneath her fingers, breathing in the scent of oil and rust. The hangar, once cold and lifeless, had begun to feel alive, as if it, too, was waiting. That night, as she watched Mia sleep, the sound of distant thunder rolled through the air. Shadow stirred, restless but calm. Lena sat by the window, her thoughts tangled between fear and hope. Somewhere out there, Evan was alive, watching, waiting. She could feel it as surely as she could feel the pulse in her wrist. And though danger lurked closer than she dared admit, for the first time in years, she was no longer haunted by uncertainty. She whispered into the dark, "I'm not afraid anymore." Outside, beyond the motel parking lot, a lone figure stood in the rain for a long time before disappearing into the night. The morning after the whistle, the air felt different. The sky above the airfield stretched wide and pale, streaked with thin clouds that promised rain. Lena parked her old car near the hangar, switched off the engine, and sat for a moment with her hand still gripping the wheel. Shadow whined quietly from the back seat, anxious to be let out. He had sensed it too, the strange electricity in the air, that unseen shift that comes before something life-changing. She took a long breath and whispered to herself, "Today, I'll find him." It wasn't hope anymore. It was certainty. When she stepped outside, the ground was damp with dew, and the smell of oil and rust clung to the air. The hangar stood ahead, massive and silent, its steel doors reflecting the morning light like a pair of watchful eyes. She unlatched the chain, pushed the doors open, and Shadow bounded inside, nose pressed to the ground. His movements were sharp, purposeful. Lena followed him across the concrete floor, her boots echoing softly in the vast, hollow space. The planes glimmered faintly under the light streaming through the cracks in the roof, their polished surfaces catching reflections of the sky. Each one seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for what would happen next. She had just reached the far end of the hangar when she heard it. A faint creak of tires rolling over gravel, distant but unmistakable. Her heart stuttered. No one came here anymore. She turned toward the sound. Through the open gap in the hangar doors, a dark-colored SUV rolled slowly into view. The vehicle stopped a few yards away, engine humming softly, windows tinted. For a long moment, nothing happened, and then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was thinner than she remembered, his hair longer, beard flecked with gray. But even from a distance, she knew. The way he moved, cautious, deliberate, grounded, was the same. The air left her lungs all at once. Shadow barked once, sharp and joyous, and then ran forward at full speed. The man froze, dropped to his knees as the dog reached him, wrapping both arms around the familiar black fur. Lena's legs felt weak. She walked toward them slowly, afraid that if she moved too quickly the image would dissolve. Evan looked up. His eyes were tired, shadowed, but alive. The kind of alive that comes after surviving something that should have broken you. "You found it," he said softly, his voice cracked with disbelief and relief. Lena stopped a few steps away. Her throat burned with too many words she didn't know how to say. For a moment they just stared at each other, the years between them hanging in the air like smoke. "You let me think you were dead," she finally whispered. He nodded, eyes heavy. "It was the only way to keep you safe." Shadow pressed against his leg, tail wagging. The dog had no doubts, no anger, only recognition. Lena wanted to hate him for the years of silence, the grief that had hollowed her out. But looking at him now, she saw what those years had done to him too. His hands trembled as he stood, his skin pale beneath the tan. "They were watching me," he said. "I couldn't risk contacting you. Every time I tried, someone was there. I was waiting for the right moment." She shook her head, tears welling. 3 years, Evan. Mia grew up thinking you were gone. I buried an empty coffin." He stepped closer, hesitating before he touched her arm. "And if I hadn't disappeared, you'd have buried both of us." For a moment she wanted to pull away, but instead she stood still and let him hold her. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the start of something that could become it. They stayed like that in silence until the wind shifted and rustled the tarp covering one of the planes. The sound broke the spell. Evan looked around the hangar and smiled faintly. "You kept them safe," he said. "I didn't even know what I was keeping," Lena replied. "William helped me. He told me what happened." Evan nodded. "Then you know why I couldn't stay. There were people selling technology meant for defense to private buyers, overseas engines, targeting systems, prototypes, the kind of secrets that can't fall into the wrong hands. I tried to expose it. When they found out, they came for me. William hid me long enough to disappear. He risked everything." Lena's anger softened into understanding. "He said you'd come back when it was safe. Is it safe now?" Evan looked toward the open door, where the SUV waited like a shadow of the past. "It will be. The men who ran the operation are gone, retired, dead, or under investigation. The files I've been collecting will finish the job." He turned back to her, his eyes bright with something that looked like peace. "But I can't keep hiding. It's time people know what happened here." They spent the rest of the day cleaning the hangar together. It felt almost like the old days, the way they moved around each other, communicating without words, each knowing what the other needed. Evan worked with quiet focus, his hands remembering the rhythm of tools, the weight of metal. Lena watched him from time to time, unable to stop herself from smiling. Shadow followed them both, tail swishing, pausing every few minutes to rest his head against Evan's knee, as if to make sure he was real. When the sun began to set, William's truck appeared at the edge of the tarmac. The old mechanic stepped out, his face breaking into a grin when he saw Evan. "About damn time," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You owe me 3 years of sleep, you know that?" Evan laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "I'll make it up to you." They talked for hours, sitting on overturned crates, surrounded by the quiet hum of evening. The hangar no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive, like a heartbeat had returned to its walls. They decided that night what would come next. Not revenge, not secrecy, but truth. They would rebuild the hangar into something that could not be buried again. Lena suggested the name first. "A museum," she said. "Not just for the planes, for the people, the stories, the things that almost disappeared. We'll tell what really happened, without lies." Evan smiled at her, pride shining through the fatigue. "The Museum of Truth," he said. "It's perfect." The months that followed were a blur of work and hope. The hangar was repaired piece by piece, new roof panels, fresh paint, electricity restored for the first time in decades. Local veterans volunteered their help once word spread that something special was happening. Donations came from mechanics, historians, and families who had once served. Even the town council, skeptical at first, offered a small grant once they saw what the place was becoming. Every morning, Lena arrived before sunrise, coffee in one hand, a wrench in the other. Evan would already be there, sleeves rolled up, grease on his face, humming under his breath as he worked. They shared long days and quiet dinners, the kind that didn't need conversation to feel complete. Mia came after school, her backpack abandoned in the office, while she ran through the hangar with Shadow chasing after her. The laughter that filled the space was something Lena hadn't realized she'd missed until it returned. One afternoon, while sorting through old documents, Evan found a box labeled Personal Effects Recovered. Inside were letters, photographs, even a pilot's helmet with a name scratched into the side. Lena traced the worn lettering with her fingers. "We could return these to their families," she said. Evan nodded. "That's the idea. The museum isn't about the machines. It's about the people who built them, flew them, lost them. The first exhibit they finished was dedicated to the pilots who never came home. Lena insisted on including their stories in full, without filters or polished endings. When the display was unveiled, veterans who attended the small preview stood in silence, some with tears in their eyes. One man, bent with age, placed his trembling hand on the wing of an old jet and whispered, "Welcome back, old friend." By summer, the Museum of Truth opened its doors to the public. The event drew more people than anyone had expected. Reporters came, families came, children came to see the shining aircraft that once slept under dust. There were speeches, photographs, laughter, and moments of stillness that spoke louder than words. At the ceremony, Evan stood at the front, his uniform jacket restored, hair trimmed short again. Lena watched him as he spoke, not like a soldier, but like a man who had finally laid down a burden. "For years," he said to the crowd, "truth was locked away behind these doors. But truth doesn't rust, and it doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone brave enough to open the lock." When the applause rose, Lena looked down at Shadow sitting at her feet, his eyes reflecting the light of the hangar. She bent down and whispered, "We did it." In the months that followed, the museum became more than a building. It became a living story. School children came to learn about courage, veterans came to remember, and families came to heal. The town that had once laughed at the idea of a mechanic buying a broken hangar now took pride in it. Local businesses grew around the visitors it brought. The airfield, once forgotten, became a place of gathering. Every evening, after the visitors left and the lights dimmed, Lena would walk the length of the hangar, touching the cool metal of each plane, whispering quiet thanks. Sometimes Evan joined her. Other times she went alone, listening to the echo of her footsteps, mingling with the distant hum of crickets. On one of those nights, she found him sitting by the entrance. Shadow curled beside him. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't bought this place?" she asked. He smiled. "I think about it every day. But you did buy it. You always fix what's broken, Lena, even when it's impossible." She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. The hangar lights cast a soft glow across the floor, reflecting off the polished surfaces of the planes. It felt peaceful, whole. Months passed, and the museum continued to grow. A new wing opened with photographs of families reunited through the artifacts they'd found here. The press called Lena the woman who rebuilt history with her own hands. She didn't like the attention, but she understood its importance. Every interview was another chance to remind people that the truth, once hidden, now belonged to everyone. One evening, after closing, Lena found Mia working on a school project at one of the workbenches. The girl had drawn the museum logo herself, a plane, a wrench, and a dog beneath the words, "Truth never rusts." She beamed up at her mother. "I'm going to be a pilot," she announced, "but I'll take care of the planes too, like you." Lena's eyes stung as she smiled. "You can be both." When she turned to leave, she saw Evan standing in the doorway, watching them. There was something unspoken in his gaze. Gratitude, maybe, or the quiet recognition that their lives had found balance again. The years of loss hadn't disappeared, but they had transformed into something else. Strength, purpose, the courage to rebuild. The museum was not just a tribute to the past. It was proof that even the most broken things could find new life if someone cared enough to restore them. On the anniversary of its opening, hundreds gathered again under the high steel ceiling of Hangar 47. Lena stood beside Evan as the local mayor unveiled a new plaque near the entrance. It read, "Dedicated to those who kept the truth alive, even when it cost them everything." Beneath the inscription, smaller letters spelled out their names, Evan and Lena, William and Shadow, the faithful witness. Later that night, when everyone had gone, Lena walked outside. The airfield stretched quiet beneath a silver moon. She looked back at the hangar, its windows glowing faintly from within. It no longer looked abandoned. It looked eternal. Shadow padded up beside her and leaned gently against her leg. She rested a hand on his head and whispered, "We're home." The wind moved softly through the grass, carrying with it the faint hum of engines long silent. Somewhere in that sound, Lena thought she could hear Evan's voice, calm and steady, saying what he'd always said when life seemed impossible. You hear that? That's the sound of something about to take off. And this time, it truly had. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales that inspire. Watch the next video to discover another incredible journey, and share this one with friends and family so the story keeps flying.